Hello and welcome to Verbal to Visual Video. I am your host, Doug Neal, and in today's episode, I'm going to share with you the one idea that has had the biggest impact on the way that I approach the development and use of visual note-taking skills. Let's get into it. The idea that I'm going to share with you today is called the 50-50 rule of visual note-taking. But before I describe that rule, I'm going to share with you some of the most common roadblocks and fears that I hear from folks who are working to develop their sketchnoting skills. I hear things like, I can't draw, or I can't draw good enough, or I can't draw fast enough. So clearly and not surprisingly, there's a good amount of fear and resistance around the topic of drawing. I also hear things like, I don't know where on the page to put these ideas that I'm hearing, or I don't want to run out of room on the page. Those roadblocks fall into the category of layout, which deals with how you arrange ideas on the page. Those roadblocks are real, and everyone encounters them to one degree or another. I think this 50-50 rule will help you to move around or over those roadblocks. So let's get into that. It is my strong belief that your ability to take useful visual notes depends on two things. Only 50% of it is about your current skill level. The other 50% is about the constraints that you set up for yourself. Those constraints are what make up your visual note-taking process. When I talk about constraints, what I mean is that you should decide up front a number of things, such as, how will you use text? I tend to focus on one title font and one core font, so that as I'm taking notes, I only have two fonts to choose between. Another question to consider up front, what will your layout look like? Maybe you could dedicate the left side of your page to visuals and the right side to text. How will you use images? Will you try to draw a ton in the moment, or maybe leave some blank space next to those words so that you can come back later and do the more time-consuming process of drawing out that idea? How will you use color? My default is to draw images in black and write the text in blue, at least for these videos. But you get to make your own decision about if and how you'd like to use color. By setting up some constraints for yourself before a visual note-taking session, you alleviate a lot of those fears that I mentioned earlier, which not only will lead to better notes, but will also allow you to enjoy the process more. Here are some additional implications that come up as a result of this rule. One is that your supposed lack of skills isn't as big of a problem as you think. The constraints that you set up for yourself make up for whatever skills you haven't yet developed. You also now have two ways to get better at visual note-taking. One is to build your skills. You could spend some time developing a few fonts that you like, or build up a set of icons that you can draw with ease. A second way to improve is by creating different constraints for yourself. Experiment with different approaches to layout and maybe different ways to balance that in the moment versus after the fact drawing. Finding the right constraints that work well for you will take some experimentation. So just start with a process that sounds good to you, apply that process in a real setting, and then improve upon it depending on how it went. That cycle is now your task. Put this idea of the 50-50 rule to the test and let me know what you find out. This idea of the 50-50 rule is brought to you by the Verbal to Visual Classroom. That idea is actually one of 7 core ideas that make up the verbal to visual mindset, which I described in full in one of the videos that I added to that classroom this past week. So if you like that idea of the 50-50 rule, I think that you'll enjoy everything else that the Verbal to Visual Classroom has to offer. You can check out more of the details about that classroom at verbaltovisualclassroom.com. Thank you guys for watching. Now go add some useful constraints to your work, and I will talk to you next time. Until then.